passed Bill 324, and that Bill 324 is an anti-critical race theory bill that seeks to protect the civil rights of students in North Carolina to be free of, I don't know, racial segregation, stereotyping, collective punishment based on their race and their gender. It's a very important day. We hope that the Governor Cooper won't veto it, although the signs point to he will do just that. But I want to introduce John right now, and he's got an unusual situation. But John is with Schoolhouse Rights, and actually John's specialty is education, specifically critical race theory. So it's an honor to have him tonight, especially because he's in New York right now and quite literally caught in the middle of a hurricane. So we may have some spotty interaction for sure, but welcome tonight, and thank you for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me, and I'm happy to talk about the bills, including the North Carolina bill. I can talk. They're getting better and better. The bills. The first couple ones that were passed were a little broad, and that doesn't mean they won't get upheld by the courts, but the courts might winnow them down and strike certain clauses from them. But the North Carolina bill is good. What it lacks is teeth. You can't. It doesn't give parents a private right of action. And as far as I know, none of the anti-CRT bills do. So parents can't sue on these bills. They can at most make a complaint, and then the state officials, like the board of the Department of Education, can then investigate, and they can take action. So it's the success of the bill, even if it's passed into law, is conditioned on you having a friendly state Department of Education, a friendly state governor, and you may have one now, but you may not have one in a couple years. But they are good. They give a great template of what's wrong with CRT. You should use that language, cut and paste, if you're writing a letter to the school, especially the North Carolina bill, about what sort of actions you won't tolerate in your school, what sort of pedagogical activities you're going to demand to be put on notice for, et cetera, et cetera. So they're actually an instructive read, a good guide for how to fight CRT. Yeah, if I could just say one great point you raised about the North Carolina bill and what distinguishes it a lot from other bills around the country is it does have that disclosure element. And that, at the end of the day, what the schools and unions are most scared about is disclosure and discovery. If you sue them and they have to pay $100,000 in damages in 3 years, their insurance company is going to pay for that. It's no skin off their back. What we want is disclosure about who's funding this curriculum. They don't want you to get into inter-office emails between Department of Education officials and DEI contractors. They don't want you to see how the sausage is made. And then they don't want you to see what they're actually teaching to your kindergartners, your first graders, who aren't necessarily going to be able to come home and accurately describe what happened in class. So the disclosure element of the North Carolina bill is absolutely clutch, and you should keep in mind that your discovery, figuring out what actually happened.
So John's going to go in and out just simply because of the weather. And so, again, 324, it has passed the Senate as we thought that it would. And that's in no small part because of all the work that Mark Robinson has done and Senator Phil Berger has done to kind of get it over the finish line. So what John just said is what we've been working on. We've been working hard on it here, Illinois, where we're really pushing, Arizona and Texas, and we're working on handling critical race theory at the state level. So in other words, our investigations here in North Carolina and beyond are really focused around who's funding what. So as I told you, before, we've done some reporting on foreign funding even. Big money going to possibly people that are on a state school board and us having all kinds of trouble. The proverbial excrement hit the fan with us. But you're right, John. They meaning people in power, whoever it is, right? They don't want you to know and understand what's going on and what kind of money is changing hands. But listen, transparency is for the government tonight for. And so, free speech, it's so hard to govern, even as a teacher, even as a government employee. So what is that point where a teacher's right in the classroom ends and a student's right begins?
Yeah, that's a good question. So public school elementary teachers, they're not like university professors. They don't have First Amendment rights in the classroom. And also, whatever they're is generally regarded as government speech. It's official government speech. It's policy. It's curricular speech. Held to a high standard. It's held to the strictures of Title VI, the Bill of Rights. It can't discriminate. And it also has to, a teacher's speech has to serve a pedagogical purpose. Once it starts veering from the subject at hand, for instance, if the teacher starts teaching CRT in math class or science class, the courts are going to bring a higher level of scrutiny into what it is the teacher is saying. Usually courts give very broad discretion to schools in what they teach. However, this stuff is just a different animal, and I've had success in my lawsuit, particularly because we showed instances where the teacher was compelling speech. So if the students are forced or even encouraged, I wouldn't get too hung up on the mandatory optional distinction. If they're encouraged or compelled to reveal certain things about their identities, that right there it's both a violation of privacy possibly, and it could.
Okay, so John's popped out again, but the privacy thing, I can't wait till he comes back on because we want to talk about the privacy. One of the things I want to ask him is about the surveys. Talk about privacy. There's something called FERPA, which is a federal law which guards privacy of the student, and PERFA, which is another privacy instance for the student. What we're having here in North Carolina, we're seeing it in Illinois, we're seeing it in Arizona also, are these surveys. So, John, you last left us with the privacy thing, and what we're wondering and what we're seeing is a continual flagrant devil may care attitude about violating FERPA in doing some of these surveys. Are you finding that? And then after you answer that, I want you to talk about your case with our good friend Gabby Clark in Las Vegas, or not? Yeah, Las Vegas, I think. But tell us about that case also.
Yeah. Well, I guess the important point about Gabrielle Clark, aside from the fact that she's brave, and so is her son, is that both she and her son collected and preserved all the curriculum information that never would have been disclosed by the school. So that gave us the evidence we needed to file pretty quickly. We didn't have to do FOIA requests for 6 months, and Gabrielle Clark actually requested information about what was going on in the class, and the school refused to provide it. fortunately, she and her son had already preserved a lot of the material, and it showed numerous instances of violation of privacy, asking students for a grade to reveal their identity, and then to assign discriminatory labels to those identities. So, right there, an assignment like that it's a violation of privacy. They have to disclose their identities, their racial, sexual, gender identities. Then they have to label those identities. So, in a pejorative way. So that right there is discriminatory because some identities get labeled as oppressor, which is insulting, and others don't. So that implicates sex discrimination, racial discrimination, and they did the same thing for religion too. And so that would implicate the First Amendment Establishment Clause. Um, the government has to remain neutral on matters of religion. It can't slap labels like oppressor and privilege on one religion or the other. So all of that gave us a lot to go on. Also, the class was just stupid and heinously racist in the illustrations it used. And if you see that, just taunting, alienating, racist messaging, that creates a hostile environment. So there's another claim you can use. A lot of information I have about this, you can find on crtattorney.com.
All right, so we have this up, and I want to show this. You've got some very good things that are illustrative of what you're talking about. And actually, we have this in North Carolina as well, where it's almost like children are being obviously taken advantage of because they're young, right? They're having to implicate themselves in some crime by virtue of their gender or their race or their religion, which is exactly what you're talking about, right? And so here is a wheel. Let me see if I can really kind of zero in on this. We're seeing a lot of this, you guys, a privilege pie, okay? And I think I distorted it, but basically it's sort of like the Matrix, you guys, that I've shown you guys over and over again. It's happening in North Carolina where you're having students, in some case, fourth graders, fifth graders, they don't understand privacy and that they're entitled to it, or having to implicate themselves. Are you white? Are you Christian? Are you straight? Even they're being asked. And so on down the line, they're having to, in essence, stereotype themselves and implicate themselves in some supposed, I don't know, crime or something like that. That is a definition of compelled speech. Is that what I'm understanding?
Yes, if the assignment is graded, or even if the assignment is encouraged, or if the kids are so young that they can't distinguish what's mandatory and optional, and they just do whatever the teacher says. As far as I'm concerned, for children of a very young age, everything is mandatory. That's directed from an adult. That's just the way they are. So those privilege wheels and that we just saw, which are in almost every curriculum and teacher training, they're especially discriminatory and actionable for a lawsuit when children have to fill them in, when they have to put in each slice of the pie what gender they are, what religion they are, and then assign the label of either privilege, oppressor, or power to those identities. And you're seeing these exercises crop up in math class and English class. They're completely unrelated to the subject at hand.
Homeroom, we're seeing it, art, and we're talking too tonight about critical race theory in general, but it's also coming in through something called SEL, or social emotional learning. And what you said something very interesting in the beginning is that it has to serve a pedagogical purpose. And so what's happening at the top, at least in North Carolina and in Illinois, is at the top level, at the state level, the purpose is social emotional learning. So that's really affective conditioning or psychological conditioning, and it's really something called brainwashing. So they're using the same techniques as really in brainwashing, the isolation and the confessionals, which is what you're talking about. And so having kids write continuous autobiographical stuff, asking the questions, answering it, that's not just so that kids can get used to expressing themselves. It actually has a purpose, a manipulative purpose, because when children are confessing very intimate details about their lives, about their families' lives, that's an invasion of privacy. And that information can and will be leveraged by teachers or others to manipulate these kids into doing things that possibly that they don't want to do. And so it's a practice in North Carolina that's being coming from the top down. We see it in social emotional learning, and we very definitely are seeing it in the social study curriculum. And we'll have a very in-depth expose on that on Monday, how the curriculum is actually being, or excuse me, the standards in North Carolina are actually as applied using the same technique as brainwashing. And of course, when you get it into little kids, obviously you have a captive audience, which is in this country, government schooling is mandated, or schooling is mandated. And so in essence, the government has a captive audience, which is why these offenses are so egregious, because if you don't have the money to get out of it, you will be abused. And that's what we're seeing, and that's why you need to know what your rights are.
Yeah, that's right. It's important to to know what you can take to an attorney, or what you can put a school on notice about. I know a lot of parental organizations are getting enormous amounts of materials.
Right, and we are. So what John is talking about is this: evidence is key. So we work with a lot of parents, really from all over, and I think the number one mistake they make, believe it or not, and it's an easy mistake to make, is that they don't have evidence. In other words, they go to the school board meetings, which great, wonderful job to do, but they don't have the evidence. And so here's what that looks like: they show up and they come onto the scene and say, "I know critical race theory is being taught. I just know it." But they don't actually have the evidence. And to your point, John, they don't know how to match the evidence up with the actual predicate for a lawsuit or the actual civil right problem. And then the second problem, or second issue that a lot of parents, have, and the problems and mistakes they make, is not actually knowing where the problem comes from. So, John, what we advocate for here is that, let's say that you've got, a teacher who is teaching that wheel of privilege. As a parent, you need to find out where that's coming from so that it can make it more actionable. If it's just a teacher who learned it at a training, okay, we'll find out what that training was. Did the district offer it, or the state? Who paid for it? And that way we know where it's coming from. Always follow the money, John. That's what we talk about here all the time, because that's really, generally how you're going to get at the root of the problem. What do you think about that? And what are some tips that you can give parents for what are they looking for in evidence preservation?
I missed that last question from you, but I did. We're breaking up a little bit, but I did hear you mention, social emotional learning, and I think that's a tool that justifies them to use it with increasingly younger ages of students, and also to direct critical race theory at special ed or IEP students who have special needs issues, and they're especially vulnerable, and they're the last people who should be exposed to this stuff. And I think by labeling and characterizing CRT as some sort of therapy, it allows them to direct it at some of the most impressionable, vulnerable types of students, the very young, and also maybe students who are cognitively impaired or emotionally fragile. And I think that's one reason why they're trying to disguise CRT as SEL. Also, there's more money in teaching special needs students than other students. So it's more lucrative if a contractor can get into, populations of students who are special needs. There's greater funding, there's greater money going around. So that's what I would say about SEL.
Okay, great. And then, school boards are very important, John, but what we're encouraging people to do is when you have a problem, you need to go at the state level also and figure that out, because you can solve all the problems that you want on the district level. But at least in North Carolina, Illinois, and California, and Texas, we're finding that that's not really doing a lot, because when they have things, they mean the state level, when they have things that they have to have the districts fulfill, a lawsuit can look very different, right? If you're suing the district, it's a lot different than suing the state. And so we need to find out where those things are coming from. And then the last thing, because I know you need to get going because of the storm, and thank you again for joining us. But the last thing that I want to ask is that this push for transgenderism, in North Carolina, we're seeing it, hold on to your hats, in preschool, in state-funded preschool. They're pushing this ideology. We're seeing it in first grade. They're pushing this ideology. What is actionable pushing this?
Everything. Treat that as a personal injury action. Accuse them of having amorous designs on your children. Why else would adults be so morbidly interested in the sexuality of small children? And then take it to a jury. I guarantee you a middle-class jury wouldn't be too tolerant of this kind of curriculum being exposed to children. I mean, it's semi-criminal, and I believe you should sue on it. It's a breach of the duty of care. These teachers are custodians of the young and the vulnerable. For them to start poking around about gender, not only is it a violation of privacy, but given the age of the students, it can induce sexual confusion. It can inflict trauma. These instances should be litigated, in my opinion, when CRT is directed on the very young. I would encourage parents to take their children to a counselor, a psychiatrist who's independent of the school, and make a record of any trauma that the child suffered. There's lots of instances of this in Tennessee.
All right, so we've been reporting on things that are going on, like I said, preschool, kindergarten, etc., that these vendors, these companies, they think that it's a fad. They think it's a fad, maybe even a profitable one, to push this transgender ideology. We've seen it with the unicorn, the gingerbread man, I don't know, they've got a teddy bear now. We've seen it in all manifestations, but exactly right. And John, we've called exactly what you've said, grooming, because it certainly appears to us that that's what it is. But again, at the state level, they're pushing it also.